Before this story continues, please allow me to make one thing clear. The story you are about to hear is a fictional narrative created for educational and entertainment purposes. It reflects the reality of toxic family dynamics and the inner journey of a woman who endured too much silence for too long. All characters' events and details are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person or real situation. This content may be supported by AI tools during the creative process. It does not promote violence, hatred, or harm of any kind. It is told to encourage empathy, reflection, and personal growth, especially for women who have sacrificed, endured, and been hurt within their own families. This story is advertiser-friendly, aligns with YouTube community guidelines, and does not intend to target or imply any real individual. If you recognize a part of your own life in this story, please stay until the end. And if your heart is moved, share your thoughts in the comments or follow the channel to continue with stories created for women who were overlooked but always deserve to be seen. Now that you know this story is fictional, we can begin. My name is Arden Hale. I am 26 years old and I live in a small apartment just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. I work in compliance and operations. I do not speak much. I write things down. I observe before I react. People often mistake that for weakness. My stepfather, Richard Hale, never did. He simply called it useless. Richard has always seen himself as the center of our family, the provider, the authority, the man whose approval you earn or lose. He believes respect is something owed to him by default. My older brother, Evan, has always understood that system. He learned early how to echo Richard before anyone else could speak, how to nod at the right time, how to finish Richard's sentences in rooms where decisions were made. Evan has been the golden child for as long as I can remember. Our mother, Margaret, died in 2005. I was 7 years old. My memories of her come in fragments. Her perfume on a winter coat, her hand squeezing mine when adults talked too loudly, her voice telling me to read the fine print and never let anyone rush me. That was all I had left of her. The rest of my life was shaped by what came after. The night everything broke open happened 3 days before Thanksgiving in November 2024. Richard called it a family briefing dinner. That was his phrase. It sounded harmless, practical. There were no decorations, no extended relatives. Just Richard, Evan, myself, and a few of Richard's longtime advisors seated around the dining table in Cary, North Carolina. The house was quiet except for the crackle of the fireplace. Richard stood instead of sitting. He held a folder in his hands the way someone holds something they intend to give away. He did not look at me when he began. He looked at Evan. He spoke in the tone he used when he believed he was being generous. He announced that Evan would be receiving $47 million through the family office. He listed property's management rights and future authority as if he were reading from a menu. Evan smiled. Not wide, not surprised, just enough to acknowledge that this was always his. Then Richard paused. He turned his head and finally looked at me. His eyes were calm. That was the part that hurt the most. He said, "Arden, this is family money. You were never suited for responsibility like this. You do not have the instincts. You never did." He let the silence stretch. Then he said it clearly so no one could misunderstand. "You are useless." The word landed in the room and stayed there. No one interrupted. One of the advisors shifted in his chair. Evan did not look at me. He laughed softly and said, "You will be fine, Arden. You are good at small things. You can keep doing your work." I felt my chest tighten, but I did not speak. I did not argue. I swallowed and nodded once. Richard continued talking about legacy and stewardship as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just erased me out loud. I stood when the meeting ended. I thanked him for dinner because that is what I was taught to do. I walked outside into the driveway where the cold air felt sharper than the words I had just heard. That was when Daniel Mercer called my name. Daniel has been the family attorney for years. He never uses first names unless something matters. He held an envelope in both hands. Thick, sealed. He said, "Your mother told me to give this to you only if he humiliated you out loud." He placed it in my hands and looked at me with a kind of respect I had never seen from anyone in that house. "If you have ever been dismissed inside your own family, stay until the end." I did not go back inside. I did not look through the windows. I did not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing my face crack. I walked to my car with the envelope pressed flat against my palm like a burn I refused to acknowledge. The air in Cary was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that usually clears your head, but that night it only made everything feel more real. Behind me, the house stayed warm and bright, the fireplace glow pooling on expensive furniture, a room full of people who could listen to a young woman get erased and then keep eating. I drove out of the neighborhood slowly, hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward as if I were leaving any ordinary dinner. My chest felt tight, but I kept my breathing even the way I do when a work call turns tense and everyone is waiting for one wrong word. Shock has a strange discipline to it. It makes you careful. It makes you quiet. The moment I merged onto the highway toward Raleigh, my phone vibrated with a message. Evan. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not even mention the word useless. He wrote, "Do not make Dad look bad. Do not cause trouble." I read it once, then set the phone face down in the cup holder like it was something unclean. The road lights passed in a steady rhythm. I counted exits without meaning to, letting the motion do the thinking my mind could not. Another vibration came a few minutes later. Richard. One line colder than the night outside my windshield. If you make a scene, you lose support. No explanation of what support meant. He never explained. He just kept words vague enough to be a leash. A sudden image flashed in my mind of him holding that folder by the fireplace, saying family money like it was scripture, like it was permission to hurt people. My fingers tightened on the wheel, then loosened. I refused to reply. I refused to beg. I had spent too many years learning that any reaction becomes evidence against you in a house like that. When I reached my apartment complex in Raleigh, the parking lot was half empty. The building looked tired, the kind of brick that absorbs sound. I liked that about it. Nobody watched. Nobody asked questions. My unit was small, clean, practical. I unlocked the door and stepped into darkness that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and the tea I forgot to throw out that morning. The kitchen light clicked on with a harsh white glow, too bright for midnight, too honest. I set the envelope on the counter and just stood there for a second, letting the quiet settle around me. My coat came off first. I draped it over the back of the chair by the small table, the same chair I use when I review contracts for work. I kicked my shoes off carefully, as if noise might bring someone to the door. My hands were trembling now, but my face stayed calm in the reflection of the microwave. I have always been good at keeping my expression neutral. It was not a gift. It was training. I opened my laptop and the screen lit up with a burst of notifications. Emails from work. Calendar reminders. A message from a colleague about a deadline. Normal life asking me to keep moving as if my stepfather had not just called me useless in front of witnesses. I stared at the corner of the screen where the time blinked, then I turned notifications off. I shut the lid. This moment did not belong to my job. It did not belong to Richard either. The envelope was still on the counter. Thick sealed, heavy, and a way paper should not be. I turned it over with 2 fingers, careful not to tear anything. The seal was old-fashioned and firm, the kind you press with a stamp. There was a faint impression in the wax, and I could tell it had been done with intention, not decoration. Daniel had looked at me like I mattered when he handed it over, like he was seeing someone else behind my silence. That look stayed with me. It was unsettling. It was also the first thing that felt like air after drowning. I took a slow breath and sat at the table. I did not open it right away. I set my phone on the other side of the table screen down and pushed it away. Then I slid the envelope toward me and traced the edge of the seal with my thumb. I thought of my mother in a way I had not let myself think of her in years. Not because I did not miss her, but because missing her felt like holding a hot pan with bare hands. I only had scattered memories. A soft voice, a careful touch, the smell of her perfume when she hugged me before bed. Her saying, "Read the small print, Arden. Do not let people rush you." Then she was gone. 2005. Cancer, they told me. Grief was something that happened around me, not with me, because Richard moved fast and kept the house moving faster. I broke the seal with a clean motion, not ripping, not rushing. Inside was a folded letter on pale paper, the kind you choose when you expect it to last. The date in the corner made my throat tighten. 2005, the year she died. My mother had written this when I was 7. I unfolded the pages slowly, as if speed could make the words hurt more. Her handwriting was neat and steady, not the shaky writing of someone fading. It looked calm. It looked certain. The first line was simple. My sweet Arden. I read it once and the room felt smaller. I kept going. Her tone was not dramatic. It was calm, direct, almost clinical in its clarity, but underneath it, I could feel something fierce, the kind of love that refuses to leave you unprotected. She wrote that she could not control what would happen after she was gone, but she could leave instructions that would keep me anchored when my world tried to tilt. Then she said the sentence that made my hands go cold. One day, he will call you useless. That will be the sign that he thinks he has won. I stopped breathing for a moment. My eyes went back to the line. He thinks he has won. Comment letter. If you believe the truth always has its hour. I swallowed and kept reading. She told me not to argue. She told me not to plead. You do not need to win with your voice, she wrote. You need to follow the process. Do not fight the story he wants you to act out. Do not give him emotion he can twist into proof. Just do things in order. It felt like she was speaking directly into the kitchen, not across 19 years. The letter did not spiral into long explanations. She did not write pages about her pain. She gave me 3 truths, like a map. First, the insult would come. It would not be accidental. It would be deliberate. Second, my power would be in sequence, not volume. Do the steps. Keep your head. Third, she named someone I had never heard of. Within a week, you will receive a call from Tina. Listen. Do not interrupt. Do not refuse the call out of fear. Just listen. My stomach tightened at the name because it was too specific to be guesswork. Tina was not a memory. Tina was a hook into something real, something planned. I looked at the envelope again, at the seal at the paper that had survived 2 decades. My mother had predicted the exact word Richard used on me tonight. She had predicted his certainty. She had predicted my silence. And she had left a name. I sat very still, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car passing outside, and the quiet click of the heating system turning on. My phone buzzed again. Evan. I did not pick it up. Then it buzzed a second time. Richard again, as if one message was not enough. If you make a scene, you lose support. The same line repeated like a threat rehearsed. The rage that rose in me was not loud. It was slow and sharp. Not the kind that makes you shout, but the kind that makes you take notes. My mother had told me not to argue, so I did not. I reached for my work bag by the door and pulled out my scanner app on my phone. My hands still trembled, but my movements were precise. I scanned the letter page by page, making sure the corners were visible, making sure the date was captured clearly. I saved the file with a timestamp. I took a photo of the envelope front and back. I zoomed in on the seal and photographed the imprint in the wax. I took another photo showing the letter beside the envelope, proof of what came from where. It was a reflex, the same reflex I use at work, when someone tries to change a record after the fact. I did not do it because I wanted revenge in that moment. I did it because my mother had taught me that calm documentation is a form of protection. When I finished, I placed the original letter back in the envelope carefully, not sealing it, just resting it there like something sacred. Then I sat again, palms flat on the table, and let the ache settle into my ribs. Tonight I had been humiliated. Out loud. In a room where people were paid to watch. Richard had called me useless like it was a final verdict. Evan had smiled like it was entertainment. But my mother had written this in 2005, and she had been right, and that meant something else might be true too. That meant there was timing. That meant there was a reason Daniel had looked at me with that strange respect. That meant a call from someone named Tina was coming within the week, and I was going to answer it. The letter did not answer everything, and that was the hardest part. It opened a door and left me standing there with memories rushing back in uneven waves. After my mother died in 2005, the house learned a new rhythm. It moved faster and colder. Richard took control of everything that could be controlled and some things that could not. The first change was small enough to be explained away. One morning, I tried to log into the family email account to check a message from my school, and the password no longer worked. I assumed it was a mistake. Richard told me later at dinner that access was being simplified. He said it kindly. Adults do not need distractions. Evan still had access. I did not. I learned then that information was a privilege you earned by agreeing. When Evan was old enough, Richard began taking him on site visits. They would leave early in the morning in pressed shirts and quiet excitement. I would be told to stay home and help around the house. Once I asked if I could come along just to see. Richard smiled the way people do when they want to end a conversation without appearing unkind. "You are smart, Arden," he said, "but you are not suited for money. Stay here and wash the dishes." Evan came back with stories about square footage and timelines and men who shook his hand like he already belonged. I listened and nodded and did not ask questions because questions were treated like challenges. The words were always gentle. That was the trick. Weaponized politeness wrapped control in something that looked like care. You are capable, just not in the ways that matter. You have potential, but not for this. We want to protect you from stress. Protection always meant exclusion. When I turned 18, Richard called me into his office and slid a document across the desk. He called it a family agreement. It was not long, but it was specific. It outlined expectations and cooperation and loyalty. It asked me to sign away any claim to future decisions in exchange for continued support. I read it twice. I saw the phrases that were meant to sound reasonable and the clauses that locked you into silence. I said I needed time. Richard's jaw tightened. Evan stood by the door with his arms crossed. "If you loved this family, you would not hesitate," Richard said. When I said I would not sign, he did not raise his voice. He leaned back and said ungrateful like it was a diagnosis. That word followed me for years. It became the explanation for every boundary I tried to set. I learned to survive by becoming invisible. I left the house as soon as I could. I worked early mornings and late nights. I took classes that fit around shifts. I paid my tuition in installments and tracked every dollar. I lived in places that smelled like old carpet and determination. I kept my spending tight because I never knew when support would disappear, and because I hated owing anyone the power to remind me. I was not failing. I was building quietly. Richard never asked about my grades. Evan never asked about my job. Success in that family only counted if it looked like them. My mother appeared in my mind at odd moments, not in full scenes but in details. The faint scent of her perfume when I passed a department store counter. The way she used to tap the margin of a page and say, "Read the small print, Arden, the truth hides there." She had taught me to notice what others skimmed. I did not understand then that she was teaching me how to live with someone like Richard. As the years went on, the control tightened in small humiliations that were easy to deny. Richard once took my car insurance card from the glove compartment and told me I should not drive a vehicle registered under the Hale name. It was said calmly, as if it were a reasonable rule. I walked to work for months after that. Evan learned early how to use proximity as leverage. When I finally found a job I liked, he mentioned knowing someone in human resources there. A few weeks later, my manager pulled me aside and asked if everything was all right at home. The question was polite. The implication was not. I realized Evan had made a call under the excuse of concern. He never admitted it. He did not have to. The message was clear. They could reach into my life whenever they wanted. That was why I stayed quiet. Silence was not submission. It was containment. I learned which words triggered consequences and which actions passed unnoticed. I learned to keep records without announcing that I was doing it. Emails saved, screenshots dated, notes written with times and names. Not because I planned revenge, but because I needed proof that my reality was real. Gaslighting only works when you cannot point to anything solid. By my mid-20s, I was living on my own terms even if my family refused to acknowledge it. I worked in compliance because it suited me. Rules were not cages to me. They were maps. I knew how to read processes and see where power actually moved. I knew how to wait. When Richard talked about legacy, he meant obedience. When Evan talked about family, he meant position. I watched and learned and did not correct them. The flashbacks did not come in order. They came as pressure points. The first time Richard laughed when someone else dismissed me. The way Evan spoke over me in rooms he knew I had been excluded from. The constant suggestion that I was almost enough. Those moments taught me that arguing only fed the system. You could not win by shouting. You could only win by understanding how the machine worked. That was why I stayed quiet at the dinner before Thanksgiving. That was why the word useless hurt but did not break me, because I had lived inside that pattern for nearly 20 years and learned its limits. My silence was not empty. It was full of observation. It was full of notes no one knew existed. By Monday morning, I had barely slept, but my mind was clear in the way it gets when a timeline starts forming. The letter sat in my bag inside a plain folder protected like a file I could not afford to lose. Daniel texted me an address in Raleigh and a time. No emojis, no comfort. Just coordinates and precision. That alone told me this was not an emotional conversation. It was an administrative one, and oddly, that made me feel safer. His office was on the second floor of a low building near downtown, not a shiny tower, just a quiet place with a small brass plaque and a waiting room that smelled like paper and coffee that had been warmed too long. When I walked in, the receptionist looked up once and nodded as if she had been told to expect me. Daniel met me at the door of his inner office and did not offer a handshake. He offered space. He said my name softly, Arden, and held the door open like he was careful not to push me into anything. The room was small, a bookshelf with legal volumes, a framed photo of an older couple, a filing cabinet that had seen decades. He motioned to a chair and sat across from me with the same calm I had seen in his eyes the night of the dinner. I placed my folder on the desk between us and waited. Daniel did not rush. He looked at the folder the way you look at something that carries weight beyond its size. Then he spoke in a tone built for clarity. Your mother left instructions. The letter is the key, but it is not the only document. It points to a condition. I felt my ribs tighten. I asked one question because it was the only one that mattered. Was she expecting this exact night? Daniel nodded once. She was not guessing, Arden. She was preparing. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin packet, not thick, not dramatic, just stapled pages with tabs. He turned the first page toward me, so I could see the heading and the date. 2005. My throat went dry. Daniel said, I am going to explain this in plain language. You do not need to be a lawyer to understand it. Your stepfather has made you believe he owns everything. He does not. The words hit me not like hope, but like a hard object placed on a table. Richard does not own everything. Daniel continued. Your mother created what we call a secondary trust. It is separate. It is not the main family structure Richard controls. It was designed to sit quietly in the background until a specific ethical condition was triggered. Ethical condition. The phrase sounded strange paired with money, but as Daniel spoke, it made sense in a way that felt both bitter and clean. He said your mother believed that control in families often hides behind embarrassment. She believed humiliation is a tool used to keep someone small, so she wrote a clause that punishes that tool. I leaned forward without meaning to. Daniel tapped the page with his finger, not theatrically, just firmly. The condition is not about death or division or a future probate fight. It is activated by behavior, specifically public humiliation or verbal disinheritance. If someone in authority uses humiliation to control you to force compliance to erase your voice, that act triggers a transfer of authority. I felt cold spread along my arms. I thought of Richard by the fireplace folder in hand, his voice saying useless. I thought of the room, the witnesses, the practiced certainty. Daniel watched my face and slowed down. This is not about feelings, Arden. It is about an observable event. Your mother required that it be out loud in front of someone besides you. She did that so it could be verified. She did that so Richard could not deny it later by saying you misunderstood. He swallowed and continued. On the night of the dinner when he called you useless and declared you unworthy of family money, he stepped over the line she anticipated. That line is the trigger. Once triggered, the secondary trust shifts certain decision rights away from Richard and away from any proxy he appointed, and it recognizes you as the party with standing to enforce the condition. I stared at the paper, then at Daniel. I did not feel triumphant. I felt sick in a steady way, because it meant my mother had expected the cruelty, expected it so precisely, that she had engineered a consequence. Daniel said, "I know what you are thinking. You are thinking, this sounds unreal." It is not. People use conditions like this in family trusts, especially when they fear coercion after they are gone. Your mother did not want you to be trapped by shame. She built a mechanism that makes shame expensive. I said nothing. My silence was different now. It was not fear. It was calculation. Daniel pushed a second page forward, pointing to a section that explained the wording. He kept it simple. Richard can still talk big, he can still posture, but he cannot claim he holds all authority once this clause is activated and verified. Verification. That word landed like the final click in a lock. Daniel continued. The reason she set it up this way is because she understood something about Richard. He respects paper more than people. So she left you paper that respects you. My eyes burned, but I refused to let tears become the center of the room. I asked, "What happens now?" Daniel answered, "Now we follow procedure. We do not make noise. We do not confront. We verify the trigger event, and we notify the relevant parties through the correct channels. That is what your mother asked for." Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression tightened. I did not need to ask. Richard had discovered something. Daniel did not hide it. He said he will call you soon and he will try to scare you into backing away. Do not take the bait. The moment I left Daniel's office and stepped into the hallway, my phone rang. Richard's name filled the screen. I answered because refusing would only make him escalate faster. His voice was sharp, stripped of the polite varnish. "What are you plotting? You have no rights. You have no authority." He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask why I was there. He went straight to ownership of my choices. I said, "I am not plotting. I am verifying something." He snapped, "You do not verify anything. You do what you are told." Then he lowered his voice into something meant to sound controlled. "If you keep this up, you lose support." Again, that word. Again, the leash. I did not argue. I said one sentence. "I will handle this through the proper process." He went quiet for half a beat, then hung up. A minute later, Evan texted me. "I will close every door for you and Carrie. You think you can embarrass Dad and still have a life here? Do not test me." My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed steady. The threats were getting closer to a breaking point. That was the escalation. Richard had moved from public humiliation to private pressure. Evan had moved from smiles to intimidation. I walked to my car and sat for a moment without starting it, letting the air in my lungs settle. Then my phone rang again, a number I did not recognize. I answered. A woman's voice, professional, careful. "Ms. Hale," she said. "This is Tina. We have an instruction to verify." The way she said my name was not casual. It was respectful, as if the system already knew who I was supposed to be in this process. I closed my eyes once just for a second because it felt like my mother was standing behind me with her hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Then I opened them and said yes. I am listening. After the call with Tina ended, I did not feel relief. I felt weight, the kind that settles when a decision becomes unavoidable. I sat in my car for a long moment with the engine off, watching people pass on the sidewalk outside the building as if nothing in their lives had just shifted. Daniel had been clear. The mechanism existed. The condition was triggered. What happened next depended on me. There were two paths, and I understood them immediately, because my mother had framed them years ago without naming them. I could activate my rights quietly and walk away. Let the system correct itself behind closed doors. Protect myself. Disappear from the family narrative and live without ever hearing Richard's voice again. Or I could let the correction happen where the damage had been done. In front of the people who had watched me be reduced to a word. In front of the ones who believed silence meant weakness. The first option promised peace. The second promised something else. Not revenge in the loud sense, but justice in the way that stops a pattern from repeating. I drove home and paced the small apartment with the lights low, thinking of my mother and the women she had known who swallowed their pain because keeping the peace felt safer than telling the truth. I thought of how easily humiliation becomes tradition when no one interrupts it. That was the loop. If I left quietly, Richard would adjust and continue. Evan would learn nothing. The next person in my place would hear a different word but feel the same erasure. I sat at the table and rested my hands flat against the surface the way I do before difficult meetings at work. If you believe justice can come through calm action, tap the heart now. The decision did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with a checklist. That was how I knew it was the right one. I would not argue. I would not accuse. I would not ask permission. I would verify. I opened my laptop and created a document titled Verification Steps. 6 lines appeared before I typed anything else because my mind had already structured it. Step 1. Confirm trigger event details, including date, time, witnesses, and exact language used. Step 2. Log all communications from Richard and Evan from the night of the dinner forward. Step 3. Schedule notarized verification call with trust administrator. Step 4. Prepare meeting agenda and supporting documents. Step 5. Confirm authority and signature status. Step 6. Attend meeting and remain silent unless asked to clarify facts. No adjectives. No emotion. Just sequence. I pulled the call logs from my phone and saved them with timestamps. I exported the voicemail Richard had left when I did not answer his second call. I took screenshots of Evan's messages and saved them in a folder labeled Context. I drafted a simple timeline of events starting with the family dinner before Thanksgiving and ending with Tina's call. I sent nothing yet. I just prepared. That night, Richard escalated. An email arrived from an address I had never been included on before. Cease contact with our counsel, it read. Any further interference will be considered hostile. He copied Evan and someone I recognized as a longtime advisor. The message was meant to intimidate. It did not address facts. It asserted dominance. I saved it and added it to the folder without replying. The next morning, I discovered my building access card at work did not open the side door as it always had. I had to go around to the front desk and explain myself like a visitor. Later that day, facilities emailed saying there was an issue with my parking permit and it had been temporarily disabled pending review. No one said Evan's name. No one had to. These were small inconveniences designed to remind me that he could reach into my routine. The pressure was increasing. That was expected. I kept moving through the list. Tina called again to schedule the verification. Her tone was precise. She did not rush. She asked for dates, names, and confirmation of witnesses. I answered calmly and stuck to observable facts. I did not describe how the word useless felt. I described who said it where and in front of whom. She asked if I consented to a recorded verification call. I said yes. She asked if I had representation. I said Daniel would attend. She set the date for the following week and told me the agenda would be circulated in advance. When I hung up, I felt something shift. The system was no longer reacting to Richard. It was responding to me. That afternoon, my phone rang with a different number. A man introduced himself as a trust officer affiliated with one of the institutions Richard often mentioned when he talked about legacy. His voice carried the neutral confidence of someone used to moving large decisions without drama. Ms. Hale. He said we wanted to inform you that pending verification, you may be required to approve certain actions previously handled by another party. This is a courtesy call. Courtesy, not permission, not a threat. I thanked him and wrote down the time of the call and his name. That was breadcrumb number 5. I did not celebrate it. I filed it. Over the next few days, I prepared like I would for any compliance review. I printed the meeting agenda. I highlighted the clause language in plain terms. I organized documents in the order they would be referenced. I practiced staying silent in my kitchen by reading questions out loud and answering them with fewer words than felt natural. Do not explain unless asked. Do not fill silence. Let the record speak. Each night before bed, I read my mother's letter again. Not the whole thing, just the 3 truths. He thinks he has won. Follow the process. Listen. By the time the meeting date arrived, I was no longer afraid of Richard's anger. Anger requires reaction. I was prepared to give none. The justice I chose was not about money. It was about interruption. It was about ending a cycle in the only language this family respected: documentation, authority, calm verification. The boardroom in the Raleigh family office looked exactly like it always had, and that familiarity made the moment sharper. Long, polished table, neutral art, water glasses placed with care. It was designed to make power feel quiet and inevitable. I arrived on time and took the seat Daniel indicated without speaking. Richard sat at the head of the table with a folder already open in front of him, like a finish line he believed was guaranteed. Evan stood near the wall at first, then took a seat slightly behind Richard, as if proximity itself could substitute for authority. Two advisors sat across from them with notepads ready. Tina joined last with a slim laptop and a printed agenda. No one acknowledged me beyond brief nods. That was fine. Silence was part of the plan. Richard began the meeting as if it were any other. He thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about efficiency and continuity. He mentioned legacy once. He did not look at me when he did. Then he reached for the pen beside the final transfer and authority memo and said, "We will proceed." Tina raised her hand slightly. It was not a dramatic interruption. It was a procedural one. "We cannot proceed until we verify the conditioned clause," she said. The pen froze midair. Richard looked up sharply. "Conditioned clause?" he repeated as if the phrase were an insult. Tina kept her voice level. "Yes. Before execution, we are required to verify whether any triggering conditions have occurred." Daniel slid a document across the table toward Tina. She did not open it yet. She looked at Richard. "This will only take a moment." Evan shifted in his chair. He glanced at me, then away. Richard laughed once without humor. "This is ridiculous," he said. "There are no conditions that apply here." Daniel spoke then for the first time. He did not raise his voice. He did not use legal jargon. He spoke like someone explaining directions. "The condition is simple. If a person with authority uses public humiliation or verbal disinheritance to control Arden, the authority changes. On the date of the family dinner before Thanksgiving, you called her useless and declared her unworthy of family money in front of witnesses. That statement meets the condition." The room went quiet. Not tense quiet, empty quiet. Evan looked at Richard. Richard looked around the table as if waiting for someone to agree with him. One of the advisors cleared his throat and then stopped himself. Tina opened the document and read the relevant lines out loud. She did not rush. She did not soften the language. She read it the way you read instructions. "This clause is enforceable. It was recorded. The verification call was completed. Authority has changed." The words landed without volume. Authority has changed. If you are watching this moment, stay with us because what comes next is the cost. Richard pushed back his chair slightly. "This is absurd," he said. "You cannot rewrite reality because someone is offended." Tina met his eyes. "This is not about offense. It is about conditions." Evan stood abruptly. "You are taking this out of context," he said, looking at Tina, then at Daniel, then finally at me. "She knows what she is doing." Daniel did not respond. He let Tina handle it, because that was how the process worked. Context does not negate the trigger, Tina said. The condition does not require intent. It requires observable behavior. We have verification. She turned the laptop so everyone could see the timeline. Date, time, witnesses, exact language. There were no opinions on the screen, only facts. Richard looked at the screen and then at me. For the first time that morning, his expression shifted. Not to remorse, to calculation. He straightened his jacket. "This meeting is over," he said. Tina shook her head once. "We still need to update the record." She looked at me then. "Ms. Hale, you are now recognized as the party with standing to approve or decline the actions listed here." She slid the pen toward me across the table. It stopped inches from my hand. I did not reach for it. I did not smile. I did not speak. I waited. Daniel leaned slightly toward me and said quietly, You may ask for a moment if you wish. I shook my head. Tina continued. We will note that execution is paused pending your review. She typed as she spoke, keys clicking in the silence. Evan exhaled sharply. This is a setup, he said. You planned this. I looked at him then. Only then. And I said one sentence. I verified it. The room froze again. Richard stood. You think this makes you powerful, he said. You think paper can erase blood. Tina closed her laptop. Paper does not erase anything, she said. It records it. Daniel gathered his documents. One of the advisors avoided my eyes. The other nodded once with something like respect. Richard turned to Evan. Fix this, he said under his breath. Evan looked at the pen, then at me, and did not move. Authority has changed, Tina repeated for the record. The meeting concluded without applause or shouting or tears. Just chairs sliding back, papers stacking, people leaving in an order that suddenly felt unfamiliar. I remained seated until the room emptied. When I stood, my legs were steady. My hands were steady. The power shift had not been loud. It had been clean. 3 weeks passed before Richard asked to see me, and by then the silence around his name had become louder than any argument we ever had. The consequences did not announce themselves with headlines or public statements. They arrived quietly through cancellations and pauses and sudden unavailability. Deals he once spoke about with certainty were delayed pending review. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered a little longer each time. I knew this not because anyone told me directly, but because the system leaves traces when it reroutes authority. I stayed out of it. I focused on my work and my routines and the steady relief of not being watched. When Richard finally reached out, he did not call. He sent a message asking if we could talk. Just talk. He suggested a coffee shop in Raleigh that he used to like because it was quiet and neutral. I agreed because refusing would only feed the story he wanted to tell himself. The cafe was calm when I arrived. Mid-morning light. Soft music. People working alone with headphones on. I chose a table near the window and waited. Richard arrived 10 minutes late and did not apologize. He looked older than I remembered. Not weaker, just less certain. He ordered coffee and sat across from me and folded his hands like he was preparing for a negotiation. He did not ask how I was. He started with context. Things have become complicated, he said. He spoke about misunderstandings and timing and how people outside the family had overreacted. He said my name carefully like it was a fragile object. You have to understand the pressure I am under. I let him speak until he ran out of words. Then he leaned forward. We need to fix this. For the sake of the family, for reputation, for continuity. He never said sorry. He never said wrong. He asked for help like it was my duty to provide it. Evan texted me while Richard was still talking. You took this too far. People are asking questions. We can smooth this out if you stop pushing. I turned the phone face down and looked back at Richard. The quiet between us stretched until he shifted in his chair. Say something, he said. I spoke then, not loudly, not slowly, just clearly. You did not call me useless by accident. You practiced it. His mouth opened, then closed. I continued. I am not here to fix what your pride broke. That was the end of it. Comment boundary. If you have ever had to say no to family. Richard stared at me as if waiting for a crack that did not come. You are making a mistake, he said finally. I shook my head once. I stood and put my coat on. As I walked out, I felt lighter than I expected. The fallout unfolded without drama. Richard lost the ability to represent the family name in several ongoing matters because authority follows recognition, and recognition had moved. Partners chose caution. They did not want to be associated with uncertainty. Evan learned quickly that proximity no longer guaranteed access. The seat he assumed was his disappeared, and he had to look elsewhere for footing. No courts, no headlines, just the market doing what it does when credibility thins. I did not celebrate. I did not check in. I let the consequences stand because that was the point. I did not celebrate when everything finally went quiet. There was no moment where I raised a glass or felt triumphant. What arrived instead was space. Mornings without tension, afternoons where my phone stayed still, evenings where I cooked simple meals and ate them slowly at my small table without rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I began by structuring my life the way I always had at work. Clearly, transparently, on my terms. I separated accounts and documented everything. I set up clean records that did not depend on anyone else's approval. Money stopped feeling like a weapon and started feeling like a tool. Not something to flaunt, something to understand. I worked with professionals who spoke plainly and respected boundaries. No favors, no shortcuts, just process. That steadiness healed me more than any dramatic apology ever could have. I created a small fund quietly, not a foundation with a name on a wall, just a practical resource for women who needed short-term legal guidance or documentation support when family pressure turned coercive. Nothing flashy. Office hours. Clear rules. Limited scope. I knew from experience that even a little clarity at the right moment could change the direction of a life. I did not tell my story there. I let the structure speak for itself. The work felt familiar because it used the same skills I had always had and been told did not matter. Reading clauses, tracking timelines, asking the right questions, and then listening. The irony did not escape me. Years earlier, my family had dismissed my career as small. They said I was good with details but not built for power. Now those same details gave me freedom. The quiet kind that does not need permission. One afternoon, a colleague forwarded an email congratulating our team on a compliance project that had closed cleanly under pressure. There was a short note of recognition attached. It was not public. It was not glamorous. It was specific. It named the risks avoided and the structure maintained. I remembered receiving a similar note years ago and tucking it away because no one at home would care. This time I printed it and pinned it above my desk, not as proof to anyone else, but as a reminder to myself. My worth had always been measurable. I just needed the right scale. I still thought about my mother often. Not with the ache that used to flatten me, but with something steadier. Gratitude mixed with grief. She had not left me money. She had left me timing and a way out. She had understood that the most dangerous trap is the one that convinces you there is no exit. By the time Richard realized he could no longer command the room, it no longer mattered to me. I had stepped beyond it. The world did not end. It narrowed in some places and opened in others. That is how systems correct themselves when you stop feeding them fear. If this story touched something in you, please like, share, and follow the channel.